I stared at the paper in my daughter-in-law's hand and honestly thought it was a joke. $600. She smiled, slid it across my own kitchen table and said, "If you're going to keep living here, Harold, you'll need to pay $600 in rent every month." I looked around the house. The same house I'd spent 38 years paying for. The same house where I'd raised my son. The same house whose deed she'd never seen. I didn't argue. I didn't tell her she was trying to charge the owner rent. I simply signed the agreement, paid the first month's rent, and made one phone call that would destroy every plan she'd built on a lie, because my daughter-in-law had absolutely no idea the house she thought she owned had never belonged to her at all. My name is Harold Bennett. I'm 78 years old. I've learned something about people over the years. They don't usually show you who they are until they believe they have all the power. 3 months ago, my daughter-in-law looked me straight in the eyes, in the home I'd spent 38 years paying for, and handed me a rental agreement. $600 a month for my own house. The strange part wasn't that she asked. The strange part was how certain she looked, like she truly believed I had no choice. She smiled politely and slid the papers across the kitchen table. "If you're going to keep living here, Harold, we think it's only fair that everyone contributes." Everyone. That word almost made me laugh. Slowly looked around the room. The oak dining table I'd built with my own hands. The grandfather clock my late wife, Margaret, bought for our 25th anniversary. The family photographs lining the hallway. Every brick, every window, every memory, paid for by me. Yet somehow, I was the one being treated like a guest. I didn't argue. I simply looked at the papers. Melissa mistook my silence for surrender. "You don't have to decide right this second," she said with a smile. "But Jason and I really need the money." Jason, my son. He stood near the kitchen island, hands buried in his pockets, looking everywhere except at me. "Jason." He finally looked up. "Is this what you want?" He hesitated, then quietly nodded. "I think it's the best solution, Dad." Dad. He couldn't even meet my eyes when he said it. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was disappointed. There's a difference. You see, I hadn't moved into their house. They had moved into mine. 5 years earlier, after Jason lost his job during a company downsizing, and Margaret had already been gone for 2 years. The house felt painfully quiet. When Jason asked if he, Melissa, and our 8-year-old granddaughter Emma could stay just for a few months, I didn't think twice. "Family doesn't need permission," I told him. "This is your home too." A few months became a year. 1 year became 5. Somewhere along the way, the thank yous disappeared. Then the respect. Eventually, even the truth. Melissa slowly took over everything. First it was, "The living room needs updating." Then, "We're repainting the kitchen." Later, "We're replacing your furniture." She never asked. She informed. Every decision sounded like it had already been made. Jason rarely disagreed. "It keeps the peace, Dad." That's what he'd always say. It keeps the peace. Peace, funny word. Sometimes people call it peace when it's really just surrender. I picked up the rental agreement. Melissa smiled. "I knew you'd understand." He turned to the last page. There was a space for my signature. Another for hers. The monthly amount, 600 lei, due on the first of every month. Late fee after 5 days. I quietly reached for the pen. Jason finally looked nervous. Dad, you don't have to sign if... Melissa interrupted. No pressure, Harold. But if we're all going to live together, everyone needs to do their part. Everyone. That word again. I signed. Slowly. Carefully. Then I reached into my wallet, counted 6 $100 bills, and placed them neatly on the table. Melissa's smile grew even wider. Thank you. We really appreciate you understanding. Smiled back. You're welcome. She had no idea that she'd just made the biggest financial mistake of her life. Because before the sun set that evening, I was going to visit someone who still kept the original deed, the trust documents, and every piece of paperwork proving exactly who owned this house. And once those papers came out, nothing inside these walls would ever be the same. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. Old habits never leave you. For 39 years, I'd started every morning with a cup of black coffee before anyone else in the house was awake. Margaret used to joke that the coffee maker knew my schedule better than she did. As I walked into the kitchen, I stopped. The smell wasn't coffee. It was fresh paint. Melissa had hired painters the day before. Half the kitchen cabinets were covered in plastic. She looked up from her phone. Oh, good morning, Harold. I hope the mess doesn't bother you. I nodded politely. I wasn't told you were remodeling. She smiled. We're trying to increase the home's value. The home's value. Interesting choice of words. I poured myself a cup of coffee without responding. Then she said something that almost made me laugh. Since you're paying rent now, I figured you'd appreciate living somewhere nicer. Slowly stirred my coffee. I suppose I will. She smiled proudly, completely unaware that every dollar she spent renovating was improving someone else's investment, mine. At exactly 9 o'clock, I drove across town, not to a bank, not to a courthouse, to a small brick office with a bronze sign outside. Emily Carter, Estate Planning and Trust Attorney. Emily had handled my family's legal affairs for almost 20 years. The receptionist smiled the moment she saw me. Mr. Bennett, Ms. Carter is expecting you. 5 minutes later, Emily walked into the conference room carrying 2 thick binders. She smiled warmly. It's good to see you, Harold. I wish it were under better circumstances. I nodded. So do I. She noticed the folded rental agreement in my hand. Her smile faded. What happened? Slid the papers across the table. She read silently. Halfway through, she removed her glasses, then looked at me in disbelief. They charged you rent? In your own home? Smiled. $600. She slowly leaned back in her chair. I've been practicing law for 28 years. I've seen children fight over inheritances. I've seen brothers sue sisters. But I've never seen someone charge the legal owner rent. She opened the first binder. Inside were documents I'd signed nearly 12 years earlier, after Margaret's cancer diagnosis, back when we started planning for the future. Emily pointed to one page. Do you remember why we created the Bennett Family Trust? I nodded. Margaret worried that if anything happened to me, the house could end up in probate. Exactly. She flipped another page. The trust owns the property. You are the sole trustee. The only person who can sell it. The only person who can mortgage it. The only person who can decide who lives there. She paused. Jason isn't a trustee. Melissa has no legal interest whatsoever. I looked out the window. I thought Jason understood all of this. Emily gave me a sympathetic smile. I think Jason assumed, and Melissa never bothered to ask. I sighed. I don't want revenge. I just want respect. Emily closed the binder. Then don't act out of anger. Act out of clarity. She handed me another folder. This contains every document proving ownership. The original deed. The trust agreement. Property tax records. Everything. Picked up the folder. It felt heavier than paper should. Maybe because it carried the truth. As I stood to leave, Emily asked one final question. Harold, what are you planning to do? Smiled. The same thing I've always done. I'm going to give them one more chance to tell me the truth on their own. That afternoon I returned home. As I stepped through the front door, I heard laughter coming from the dining room. Melissa was talking to two neighbors. She didn't know I was there. One of the women looked around the house and asked, You two must be excited. Melissa laughed. We're finally making this place feel like ours. Then she added, It took a while, but Harold finally understands who's in charge now. Stood quietly in the hallway. The folder from my attorney still tucked under my arm. Neither Melissa nor Jason had any idea. The papers inside that folder were about to change every conversation we'd have for the rest of our lives. I didn't walk into the dining room. I stayed exactly where I was, hidden by the hallway wall, long enough to hear the rest. One of the neighbors laughed. So, Melissa, when are you and Jason finally putting the house in your names? Melissa didn't hesitate. Oh, that's just paperwork. Jason's father is old. He already said everything will be ours. I closed my eyes. No, I had never said that. Not once. Another woman asked, So Harold doesn't mind living in the guest room? Melissa smiled. He'll adjust. At his age, people don't need much space. The guest room. That stopped me cold. I'd been sleeping in the master bedroom for 38 years. Margaret and I had painted those walls together. We'd picked the curtains together. We'd held Jason in that room the night he came home from the hospital. Now my own daughter-in-law was discussing moving me out, as though I were old furniture. Finally stepped into the room. The conversation ended instantly. Melissa forced a smile. Oh, Harold, I didn't hear you come in. I noticed. The two neighbors looked uncomfortable. On quickly stood. We should probably get going. Within seconds, they were gone. Silence filled the house. Melissa crossed her arms. You look upset. I calmly placed my keys on the counter. I heard enough. Heard what? I looked directly at her. The part where I'm moving into the guest room. She didn't even blush. Well, we've been talking about it. The master bedroom is much bigger. It makes more sense for Jason and me. Nodded slowly. And where exactly was I supposed to sleep? The guest room. It's only one person. She said it so casually, like she was discussing where to store holiday decorations. Before I could answer, Jason walked through the front door. He immediately sensed the tension. What's going on? Melissa spoke first. I was just explaining the bedroom situation. Jason looked at me. Dad, I was going to tell you. When? He looked down. This weekend. Smiled sadly. So the decision had already been made. Neither of them answered. That told me everything. I quietly picked up my coffee mug. You know, when your mother was dying, she asked me for one promise. Jason looked up. What promise? She asked me, never let this house stop feeling like home. I paused. I've spent 5 years trying to keep that promise. I don't recognize this house anymore. Melissa sighed dramatically. Harold, you're making this emotional. No, I replied softly. You already did. I walked upstairs without another word. Inside my bedroom, I opened the closet. On the top shelf sat an old wooden box, full of hundreds of family photographs. I spent almost an hour looking through them. There was Jason, age 6, holding the bicycle I'd saved 6 months to buy. Another photo, his high school graduation. Then his wedding, Margaret smiling beside Melissa, back when we all believed we'd be one happy family. A tear rolled down my cheek, not because of the house, because somewhere along the way, I'd lost my son long before anyone tried taking my bedroom. That evening, there was a knock on my bedroom door. It was Emma, my 12-year-old granddaughter. She quietly stepped inside. Grandpa. I smiled. Hey, sweetheart. She looked nervous. I heard Mom talking. I stayed silent. Then she asked a question that broke my heart. Grandpa, are you really going to move away? Before I could answer, she reached into her hoodie pocket and handed me $20. I've been saving this for your rent. My throat tightened. She thought I actually had nowhere else to go. I hugged her tightly. At that moment I realized something. There was still one person in this house who hadn't forgotten what family meant, and I was about to make sure she never paid the price for the choices the adults had made. I closed my hand around the $20 bill. It wasn't the money that hurt. It was the reason she'd given it to me. Emma truly believed her grandfather couldn't afford to live in his own home. Smiled and handed it back. Keep this, sweetheart. You'll need it someday. She shook her head. No, I want you to have it. If Grandma were here, she wouldn't let Mom do this. The words hit harder than anything Melissa had ever said. Children have a way of telling the truth without realizing it. I hugged Emma tightly. I promise you something. No matter what happens, this will always be your home. She looked confused. But Mom said we might sell it next year. Slowly pulled back. Sell it? Emma nodded innocently. I wasn't supposed to hear. But Mom told Dad, if they sell this house, they can buy one closer to the country club. My smile disappeared. Country club? Sell the house? Without ever speaking to me. For the first time, I realized this wasn't about $600. It wasn't even about respect. Melissa already had plans for a house she didn't own. That evening, after everyone had gone to bed, I walked downstairs for a glass of water. As I passed the dining room, I noticed Jason's laptop sitting open. Normally, I would have walked away. But one sentence on the screen caught my eye. Projected profit after sale, $480,000. I froze. A spreadsheet filled the screen. Estimated selling price, agent commission, Closing costs. Expected profit. There it was, right in front of me. They had already calculated exactly how much money they'd make from selling my house. I never touched the keyboard. I didn't need to. The evidence was already there. Just then, I heard footsteps upstairs. I quietly walked away before anyone saw me. The next morning, Melissa was unusually cheerful. "Good morning, Harold. I made pancakes." I thanked her politely. She poured coffee into my mug, then casually asked, "Have you ever thought about downsizing?" I looked at her. "What brought that on?" She shrugged. "This house is a lot for one person. You could probably find a nice little apartment." Jason immediately looked uncomfortable. "Melissa." She ignored him. "I'm just saying it might be easier." I smiled. It certainly would. Both of them looked surprised. "It would." "Yes, it would make life much easier for one of us." Neither understood what I meant. Not yet. Around noon, my phone rang. It was Emily. "Harold, I found something you should see." "What is it?" I was reviewing the trust documents, and I remembered something Margaret insisted on adding. Frowned. "I don't remember." Most people wouldn't. There was a special clause. What kind of clause? Emily's voice became very calm. "If anyone living in the property ever attempts to collect rent from the trustee, or falsely represents ownership of the home, their right to remain in the property can be legally terminated immediately." Stopped walking. "You're serious?" I have the signed documents in front of me. I closed my eyes. Margaret. Even after all these years, she had protected me. Emily spoke again. "I know you don't want revenge. But Harold, you now have every legal right to ask them to leave." I looked back toward my house. Jason was mowing the lawn. Melissa was sitting on the porch, scrolling through her phone, completely unaware that one paragraph, written by my late wife 12 years earlier, had just changed all of their plans, and they still had no idea the biggest surprise was only days away. The moment I hung up with Emily, I didn't feel angry, felt relieved. For weeks, I'd been asking myself the same question. Did I somehow fail as a father? Had I spoiled Jason too much? Had I made life too easy for him? Or had I simply ignored the warning signs because I loved him? That afternoon, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. I drove to the cemetery. Margaret had been gone for almost 7 years, yet somehow, whenever life became too heavy, I still found myself talking to her. I placed fresh white lilies beside her headstone. "They're struggling, Maggie." Smiled sadly. "But not because they don't have enough. They're struggling because they forgot the difference between earning something and expecting it." A cool breeze moved through the trees. For just a moment, it almost felt like she was sitting beside me. I laughed quietly. "You are right. You always said, 'Money never changes people, Harold. It only reveals who they already are.'" She had been right. Again, when I arrived home, something caught my attention immediately. A large luxury SUV sat in my driveway. I didn't recognize it. Inside, a sharply dressed man in his 50s was shaking Jason's hand. Melissa looked happier than I'd seen her in months. As I walked toward the porch, I heard the stranger say, "I've seen the neighborhood. If the house is in the condition you described, My clients would absolutely be interested. Stopped walking. House? Clients? Jason noticed me first. Dad, you're home. Melissa quickly stepped forward. Oh, Harold, this is Mr. Collins. He's just giving us some advice. The man smiled politely and extended his hand. Nice to meet you. Shook it. What kind of advice? Before Melissa could answer, he replied honestly, I'm a real estate broker. The silence that followed was almost uncomfortable. I looked at Jason. A broker? Jason swallowed hard. We're just exploring options. Smiled politely. Options for what? Melissa answered this time. The future. The market is excellent right now. It would be foolish not to see what the property is worth. Property, not home. Property. Mr. Collins opened his folder. I'd actually love to take a quick look around. Before anyone else could speak, I smiled. I'm afraid that won't be possible. He looked confused. Oh? I don't give strangers tours of my house. Melissa forced a laugh. Oh, Harold, you make it sound like it's only your decision. I looked directly at her. It is. She rolled her eyes. Legally. Jason interrupted. Dad, can we not do this in front of Mr. Collins? I smiled. You're right. Then I turned toward the broker. I'm sorry you wasted your afternoon, but no one will be selling this house. The broker looked from me to Jason, then back again. He could sense something wasn't right. I think I'll leave you folks to it. Within seconds, he was walking back to his SUV. Melissa slammed the front door the moment he drove away. What was that? I calmly removed my jacket. That was me protecting my property. She laughed. Your property? Harold, Jason is your only son. Everything here will belong to him anyway. I looked into her eyes. For a long moment I said nothing, then quietly replied, That's an interesting assumption. She frowned. What does that mean? I smiled. You'll find out soon enough. That night, after everyone had gone upstairs, my phone rang. It was Emily. Her voice sounded unusually serious. Harold, I've scheduled a meeting. What kind of meeting? Friday, my office. I'd like Jason and Melissa there. I nodded. They'll come. Emily took a slow breath. Good, because after Friday, they'll never be able to say they didn't know the truth. Friday arrived. Cold. Gray. The kind of morning that makes the whole world feel unusually quiet. I was already dressed when Jason knocked on my bedroom door. Dad, you ready? I smiled. I've been ready for a long time. He didn't understand what I meant. Not yet. The drive to Emily Carter's office was almost silent. Melissa spent most of the trip scrolling through her phone. Every few minutes she'd smile. I assumed she was texting friends, probably telling them how close they were to selling the house. Jason gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had turned white. He knew something was wrong. He just didn't know how wrong. When we arrived, Emily herself greeted us. Good morning. She smiled warmly at me, then politely nodded toward Jason and Melissa. Thank you both for coming. Melissa looked around the conference room. I hope this won't take too long. We've got another appointment this afternoon. Emily smiled politely. I'm sure you do. But I think this meeting is more important. A thick folder sat in the center of the table. Emily slowly opened it. I've asked everyone here today because there's been a misunderstanding. Melissa immediately interrupted. What misunderstanding? Emily slid the first document across the table. The ownership of 214 Willow Creek Drive. Melissa barely glanced at it. We know who owns it. Emily folded her hands. Please read it. Melissa picked up the first page. Her confident smile slowly faded. She looked again, then at Jason. This can't be right. Jason grabbed the papers. His eyes moved rapidly across every page. Trust agreement, property deed, county records. Every document carried the same name. Harold Bennett. He looked at me. Dad, I don't understand. Emily calmly explained. 12 years ago, Harold and his late wife created the Bennett Family Trust. The trust became the legal owner of the property. Harold remains the sole trustee, the only person legally authorized to occupy, lease, mortgage, or sell this home. Melissa leaned forward. There must be another document. There isn't, Emily answered without hesitation. I reviewed every filing. There has never been another owner. The room fell silent. Jason slowly looked down. So I don't own the house? Emily gently shook her head. No, you never have. Melissa's face turned pale. But we've been paying utilities. We renovated the kitchen. We replaced the floors. Emily nodded. And those were personal decisions. They did not change ownership. Quietly watched both of them. Not with satisfaction, with sadness. Because everything happening in that room could have been avoided if someone had simply asked the truth. Emily opened another folder. There is something else. Melissa looked up nervously. What now? Emily placed a single sheet of paper in front of her. The rental agreement. Melissa immediately recognized it. So, Emily looked directly at her. You charge the legal owner $600 each month to continue living in his own home. Nobody spoke, not even Jason. Emily continued. And according to Clause 14 of the Bennett Family Trust, knowingly collecting rent from the trustee while falsely claiming authority over the property constitutes a material violation. Melissa whispered. What does that mean? Emily closed the folder. It means Harold now has every legal right to terminate your permission to live in the house. Jason slowly turned toward me, his eyes full of regret. Dad, please. Before he could finish, Emily quietly slid one final envelope across the table. Harold, I believe this decision is yours. I looked down at the envelope. Inside was a document that would determine who would still be living in my house by the end of the week. I looked at the envelope for a long time. It wasn't just paper. It was a decision. One signature, and Jason and Melissa would have 30 days to leave the house. Legally. Immediately. Emily spoke softly. Harold, take your time. No one is rushing you. I nodded, then looked across the table. Jason couldn't even meet my eyes. Melissa's confidence had completely disappeared. For the first time since this all began, she looked afraid, not of losing the house, of facing the truth. Slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a formal notice to terminate occupancy. Everything was already prepared. All that was missing was my signature. I picked up the pen. Melissa suddenly stood. "Please don't do this." Her voice was shaking. "I know I've made mistakes." I looked at her calmly. "Mistakes?" She lowered her head. "I was wrong. I honestly believed Jason already owned the house." Emily quietly interrupted. "Melissa, that still doesn't explain charging Harold rent." The room fell silent again. Melissa had no answer, because there wasn't one. Jason finally spoke. "Dad, this is my fault. I should have stopped all of this. I knew she wanted to charge you rent. I knew she wanted the master bedroom. I knew she wanted to sell the house." His voice cracked, and every single time I stayed quiet. I looked at my son. "Do you know why that hurts more than anything else?" He slowly shook his head. "Because silence is how good people help bad decisions grow." A tear rolled down his face. "I know. I've been ashamed ever since." Emily quietly stood. "I'll give you three some privacy." She left the conference room, closing the door behind her. For several minutes, nobody spoke. Then I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small photograph. It showed Jason, 8 years old, covered in mud, after we spent an afternoon building a treehouse together. Slid it across the table. "Do you remember this day?" Jason smiled through his tears. "We worked until sunset. You wouldn't let me quit." I nodded. "Do you remember what I told you?" He thought for a moment, then whispered, "A strong house isn't built with expensive wood. It's built on a solid foundation." I smiled. "Exactly." Then I looked directly into his eyes. "Jason, you spent 5 years trying to improve this house. New floors, new kitchen, fresh paint." I paused. "But while you were fixing the house, you forgot to protect the family living inside it." He covered his face. "I'm so sorry, Dad." Melissa quietly began crying. Not loudly, not dramatically, just silently. For the first time, she wasn't defending herself. She wasn't making excuses. She simply looked broken. Took a deep breath. Then I slowly folded the eviction notice and placed it back inside the envelope. Neither Jason nor Melissa understood. Jason looked confused. "Dad?" Smiled sadly. "Your mother always told me, the easiest thing in the world is to throw people away. The hardest thing is helping them become better." Melissa looked up. Hope returned to her eyes. But before anyone could speak, I added one sentence. "I am not signing this today." Both of them let out a breath. Then I finished. "But don't mistake mercy for permission." I stood up, picked up the trust documents, and looked at both of them. Because starting today, everything in that house will finally be done my way. The silence that followed was louder than any argument we'd ever had. When we walked out of Emily's office, no one said a word. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was honest. For the first time in years, there was nothing left to pretend. Jason drove home with both hands gripping the steering wheel. Melissa stared out the passenger window. She hadn't touched her phone once. That alone told me something inside her had finally changed. As soon as we pulled into the driveway, I unlocked the front door, then turned around. "There are a few things we need to settle." Jason nodded immediately. "Whatever you say, Dad." I walked into the living room. The first thing I noticed was Margaret's rocking chair. It had been pushed into the corner months ago. Melissa had replaced it with a large leather recliner. She used to call it a modern upgrade. I walked over, placed both hands on the old chair, and gently pulled it back beside the fireplace, exactly where Margaret had always kept it. No one stopped me. Then I looked at Jason. The next thing, we walked upstairs into the master bedroom, my bedroom. Half the closet was filled with Melissa's clothes. Family photos of Margaret had disappeared. In their place were expensive decorations. I slowly opened the closet door, then quietly said, "I'd like my room back." Melissa lowered her eyes. Without arguing, she began removing her clothes from the closet. Jason silently helped her. For nearly an hour, neither of them complained. They simply carried boxes downstairs. Watching them, I wasn't happy. I was heartbroken, because none of this had to happen. That evening, Emma came home from school. The moment she saw my rocking chair back beside the fireplace, her face lit up. "Grandpa, you moved it back." I smiled. It never should have been moved. She ran over and hugged me, then looked upstairs. "Why are Mom and Dad carrying boxes?" Before I could answer, Melissa walked down the stairs carrying another box. She stopped in front of Emma, knelt down and quietly said, "I made some bad decisions." Emma looked confused. Melissa smiled sadly. "And Grandpa is giving me a chance to fix them." It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was the first honest sentence I'd heard from her in years. 3 days later, there was another knock at the front door. It was Mr. Collins, the real estate broker. He smiled politely. "Just wanted to follow up. I assume we're ready to list the property." Before Jason could answer, I stepped forward. "I'm afraid there won't be a listing." Mr. Collins looked surprised. "Oh?" I smiled. "This house isn't for sale." He nodded respectfully, then looked at Jason. "I wish more families handled disagreements this honestly." After he left, Jason stood quietly on the porch. "Dad, I almost sold something that wasn't even mine." Placed a hand on his shoulder. "No, you almost lost something that was worth far more than the house." He looked at me. "Our family." I smiled. "Now you're finally understanding." Just then, my phone rang. It was Emily. "Harold, the trust amendments are ready." Frowned. "I didn't ask for amendments." "I know, but after what happened, I think you'll want to read what Margaret wrote in a sealed letter 12 years ago." Stopped breathing. "A letter?" Emily's voice softened. "She instructed me to give it to you only if your family ever forgot." What this house truly meant. I slowly looked back at the front door, at the home Margaret and I had built together. Somehow, even after all these years, she still had one final lesson waiting for all of us. I sat alone in the living room that evening. Margaret's rocking chair creaked softly beneath me. The house felt different, not because the walls had changed, but because the truth had finally been spoken inside them. An hour later, Emily arrived. She carried a single sealed envelope. Across the front, in Margaret's handwriting, were 6 simple words. "Open only if they forget." My hands trembled. I carefully broke the seal. Inside was a letter. I recognized her handwriting immediately. I took a deep breath and began to read. "My dearest Harold, if you're reading this, then something has gone wrong. Not with the house, but with the family inside it. I always worried that one day people might begin loving what we owned more than the people who built it. If that ever happens, please don't let anger make your decision. Teach them. A home is never measured by its value. It's measured by how safe people feel when they walk through the front door. If Jason has forgotten that, remind him. If Melissa has never understood it, teach her. And if little Emma still has kindness in her heart, protect it at all costs. That little girl is the future of this family. I love you, always. Margaret. By the time I finished reading, I couldn't see the page anymore. My eyes were full of tears. Across the room, Jason and Melissa stood silently. Neither of them had spoken. Neither of them had moved. Finally, Melissa walked over. She looked at Margaret's photograph hanging above the fireplace, then quietly whispered, "I'm sorry. Not because we got caught, but because I forgot this was someone's lifetime before it was ever my address." For the first time, I believed her. Jason stepped forward next. He reached into his pocket and placed something on the coffee table. It was the key to the master bedroom. "Dad, this was always your room. It always will be." Smiled, then looked at both of them. "I have one condition." They nodded immediately. "Anything. No more talking about this house as an investment. No more talking about selling it. As long as I'm alive, this house is a home, not a business deal." Jason wiped away a tear. "Promise." Melissa nodded. "So do I." Slowly opened the trust folder. Emily watched quietly. "I'd like to make one small change." She smiled. "What would you like to add?" I looked toward Emma, who was coloring quietly at the dining table. "I want one sentence added." Emily picked up her pen, spoke slowly. "This home may never be sold unless every generation living here agrees that family matters more than money." Emily smiled. I think Margaret would have loved that. 1 year later, Sunday dinners had returned. The master bedroom was mine again. Margaret's rocking chair sat beside the fireplace, exactly where it belonged. Melissa never mentioned rent again. Jason visited my room every morning before work, just to ask, "Good morning. Dad, need anything?" And Emma, she taped her $20 bill inside a picture frame. When I asked why, she smiled. So I never forget that Grandpa once paid rent for his own house. Laughed. "No, sweetheart. I paid $600 to discover who truly belonged in this family. Sometimes the most valuable thing you'll ever own isn't your house. It's the people who finally learn why it was built." The end.